Today, Honda is one of the most powerful manufacturing companies on earth. They build cars that millions of families depend on every single day. They build motorcycles that dominate roads across every continent. They build jet engines. They build power equipment. They even build robots. Honda produces more engines than any company in human history. This is a multi-billion-dollar industrial empire, but none of it started in a factory. None of it started with engineers, investors, or universities. It started with a 15-year-old boy who wasn't paid to build anything. He was paid to clean floors, to wash grease off the walls, and to carry someone else's baby on his back. No salary, no education, no connections. Just a teenager from a dirt-poor village, trying not to go home a failure. Decades later, that same boy would compete head-to-head with the biggest car companies in the world. He would challenge American and European manufacturers on their own turf, and he would win. This is not a story about genius. It's not a story about luck. It's a story about obsession, about failure, and about how one man rebuilt himself again and again, until the world had no choice but to notice his name. This is the true story of Soichiro Honda, and it begins far from factories, cities, or success. In 1906, Japan was not the industrial power we recognize today. It was still a country struggling to modernize. Large parts of it remained rural, isolated, and desperately poor. In a small village called Tenryu in Shizuoka Prefecture, nestled near the base of Mount Fuji, a boy named Soichiro Honda was born. Tenryu was not a place of opportunity. It was a place where families survived on what their hands could produce, where work was physical, where illness was common, and where death was never far away. Soichiro's father was a blacksmith. By day, he forged metal by hand. By night, he repaired bicycles for neighbors who couldn't afford replacements. His mother was a weaver, patient, skilled, working endlessly just to keep the household alive. Money was scarce. Food was never guaranteed. And for the Honda family, tragedy came early. 5 of Soichiro's siblings died in childhood. Illness, poor medical care, and poverty claimed them one by one. By the time Soichiro was old enough to understand the world around him, death was not something rare or shocking. It was part of daily life. Survival was the real lesson. And survival meant learning to work with your hands. From an early age, Soichiro spent his time in his father's workshop. He watched metal heat, bend, crack, and break. He watched broken machines come back to life. He didn't learn from books. He learned from touch, from sound, from failure. But nothing in that village prepared him for what he would see one day at the age of 8. While walking through the neighborhood, Soichiro heard a strange noise. It wasn't the sound of horses. It wasn't the sound of tools. It was a deep, mechanical rumble. He followed it, and then he saw it. A massive piece of machinery rolling forward on 4 wheels. A Ford Model T. It was the first automobile Soichiro Honda had ever seen. He would later describe the moment as electric. He didn't understand how it moved. He didn't understand how it produced power. All he knew was that it moved on its own. And when the car passed him, without thinking, without hesitation, he ran after it, as fast as he could, chasing a machine down a dirt road. That moment burned itself into his mind. Not because it was beautiful, but because it was impossible. From that day forward, Soichiro became obsessed with machines. He took apart farm equipment. He repaired bicycles. He learned how to sharpen blades properly, how to listen to engines instead of looking at them. But while his hands grew skilled, His relationship with school collapsed. Soichiro hated formal education. He hated sitting still. He hated memorizing information that had nothing to do with real machines. His grades were terrible, so terrible in fact, that he once used a piece of rubber to forge his family's stamp on his report cards so his father wouldn't have to sign them. Eventually he was caught, and his father punished him severely, not with violence, but with humiliation. Soichiro was forced to kneel for an entire day. No lunch, no rest. It was meant to teach him discipline. Instead, it taught him something else. That school was not where his future would be found. Machines were. By his teenage years, Soichiro knew one thing with absolute certainty. He did not belong in Tenryu. And he did not belong in a classroom. If he wanted to build something with his life, he would have to leave. In 1922, at just 15 years old, Soichiro came across a magazine advertisement. It was placed by a Tokyo-based automobile servicing company called Art Shikai. The company specialized in repairing imported vehicles. At the time, automobiles were rare in Japan. They were expensive, foreign-made, owned almost exclusively by the wealthy. But to Soichiro, Art Shikai represented something else: access. He reasoned that if anyone in Japan understood machines, it would be them. So he wrote them a letter, no resume, no credentials, just raw determination, and against the odds, they replied. They invited him to Tokyo. At 15 years old, Soichiro Honda dropped out of school, left his family behind, and traveled to the largest city he had ever seen. He didn't know it then. But this decision would cost him years of humiliation, and eventually, change the industrial world forever. At 15 years old, most kids are still being protected from the world. Soichiro Honda ran straight into it. He left his village with nothing more than a small bag, a handwritten letter of acceptance, and a belief that machines mattered more than comfort. Tokyo was overwhelming. The noise, the crowds, the speed. Everything moved faster than anything he had ever known. But Soichiro didn't come to Tokyo to be impressed. He came because he believed this city held the future. And if he wanted a place in that future, he had to endure whatever it demanded from him. When he arrived at Art Shikai, one of the most respected automobile service companies in Tokyo, he expected work. What he got instead was silence. The owner looked at him, a skinny teenager with dirt-stained clothes and no education, and wondered whether this boy had come to the wrong place. Soichiro was not handed tools. He was not taught repairs. He was not paid. Instead, he was given a baby. His job was to carry the owner's child on his back, clean the workshop floors, and stay out of the way. Day after day, he watched skilled mechanics work on machines he wasn't allowed to touch. Engines from America, cars from Europe, motorcycles brought in by wealthy clients. Soichiro saw everything, but he was invisible. For months, he earned no money. He slept where he could. He ate what he could find. And every night, he faced the same question in silence: why stay? The answer was simple. Going home would mean failure. Returning to his village would mean admitting that his obsession with machines had led nowhere, so he stayed. He cleaned floors until his hands cracked. He carried the child until his back ached. He stood quietly in corners, watching how men older than him solved mechanical problems. He memorized sounds. He memorized movements. He memorized mistakes. Art Shikai was more than a repair shop. It was a window into the modern world. At the time, automobiles in Japan were rare. They were luxury items. Most were imported from the United States or Europe. Each one was different. Different designs, different engineering philosophies, different failures. Soichiro didn't just see machines, he saw patterns. American cars were powerful but crude. European cars were precise but complex. Each reflected the country that built it. And while the mechanics focused on fixing problems quickly, Soichiro focused on understanding why those problems existed in the first place. He learned without permission. He learned without instruction. He learned because he had no other choice. Months passed. Then something changed. The workload at Art Shikai increased. Demand was growing. There were more cars than hands to repair them. And slowly, reluctantly, the owner allowed Soichiro closer. First, small tasks, holding tools, fetching parts, cleaning components instead of floors. Then, observation became participation. Soichiro's hands touched engines for the first time. Not confidently, not skillfully, but carefully. Every mistake mattered. Every success went unnoticed. But he didn't care. He wasn't there to be praised. He was there to absorb. Art Shikai worked on everything: American Lincolns, European Daimlers, foreign motorcycles. Soichiro learned how engines failed under stress, how metal behaved when overheated, how poor design revealed itself over time. He saw what worked. And more importantly, he saw what didn't, while others saw work. Soichiro saw education. This was not school. This was better. There were no lectures, only consequences. During this time, motorsports were beginning to take hold in Japan. Racing was gaining attention across Europe and America. And Art Shikai wasn't just repairing vehicles, they were building them. The company began experimenting with racing cars, using second-hand engines and modified frames. Soichiro watched closely. Motorsports fascinated him, not because of speed, but because racing exposed truth. On the track, engineering mistakes couldn't hide. Weak designs failed loudly, strong ones survived. This idea became central to Soichiro's thinking. If you want to know whether something works, push it until it breaks. In 1924, Art Shikai entered a racing car into the Japanese Motor Car Championship. Soichiro was just 17 years old. He wasn't the driver. He wasn't the engineer in charge, but he was there, watching, listening, learning what pressure did to machines and to people. The car won. For Soichiro, it was a revelation. Racing wasn't just competition, it was a laboratory, and from that moment forward, motorsports became his religion. But his position at Art Shikai didn't change overnight. He was still the lowest-ranking worker. Still replaceable, still expendable. What kept him there was not hope, it was fear. Fear of returning home empty-handed. Fear of becoming just another village boy who tried and failed. Soichiro chose humiliation over regret. He accepted being overlooked. He accepted being underpaid. He accepted being underestimated. Because every day he stayed, he gained something no one could take from him: experience. By the time others noticed his talent, it had already been forged. Quietly, relentlessly. In the shadows. The humiliation years didn't make Soichiro Honda bitter. They made him patient. They taught him that progress didn't come from recognition. It came from endurance. And long before the world knew his name, Soichiro Honda was already building something far more important than a company. He was building himself. And the question remained: how long would you work for nothing before you give up? Soichiro Honda answered that question by never giving up at all. By the mid-1920s, something was changing. Not just in Soichiro Honda, but in Japan itself. The country was waking up to speed. Machines were no longer curiosities. They were becoming symbols. Symbols of progress, of power, of modern identity. Across Europe and America, motorsport was exploding in popularity. Racing wasn't just entertainment, it was proof. Proof that engineering mattered, that precision mattered, that pushing machines to their limits revealed truths no workshop ever could. And slowly, that same obsession reached Japan. At Art Shikai, the repair shop where Soichiro Honda had spent years cleaning floors and carrying babies, the work began to change. They weren't just fixing cars anymore, they were building them. Experimental machines assembled from salvaged parts, second-hand engines, modified frames, crude by modern standards, dangerous by any standard. But to Soichiro, they were irresistible. Racing stripped machines down to their essence. On the track, there were no excuses. Bad design didn't fail politely, it failed violently. And that fascinated him. Soichiro wasn't drawn to racing because of glory. He was drawn to it because racing exposed reality. At speed, every weakness showed itself. Every vibration mattered. Every bolt mattered. Every decision had consequences. While others saw racing as spectacle, Soichiro saw it as education. He studied the cars the same way he had studied engines for years. Not by asking questions, by watching, by listening, by noticing what broke first. Art Shokai's owner, Yuzo Sakakibara, saw something in the young man. Not discipline, not polish, but intensity. Soichiro absorbed information faster than anyone else in the shop. He remembered everything. How American engines delivered brute power. How European designs favored balance and precision. How cooling systems failed. How transmissions cracked under stress. Racing combined all of it. And when Art Shikai decided to build a racing car, Soichiro was there. Not as a driver, not as a leader, but as a relentless presence, working late, observing constantly, chasing answers no one had asked yet. Their first major project was a race car, built using a second-hand Daimler engine. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't refined, but it ran. And in racing, running was everything. Then came the Curtiss, an even more radical machine. An aircraft engine taken from an American Curtiss biplane, mounted onto a modified car chassis. It was absurd, unbalanced, terrifying, and incredibly fast. In 1924, that car entered the Japanese Motor Car Championship. 17-year-old Soichiro Honda was there, not behind the wheel, but beside it, as an accompanying engineer, watching every vibration, every sound, every failure that didn't quite happen. Against expectations, the Curtiss won, first place. For the Art Shikai team, it was a triumph. For Soichiro, it was confirmation. Racing worked. It exposed truth faster than any classroom ever could. From that moment on, motorsport became more than a passion. It became belief. Speed, to Soichiro Honda, wasn't recklessness. It was honesty. Machines told the truth when pushed. People did too. The confidence that followed was immediate and dangerous. Soichiro began to believe that understanding machines deeply meant understanding success itself. He was young. He was talented. And he was learning faster than those around him. Too fast. In 1926, Japan drafted young men for military service. Soichiro was called. But medical examinations revealed something unexpected. He was colorblind. unfit for military duty, rejected, while others saw this as a flaw. Soichiro saw it as freedom. The army would not take his time. Machines would. He returned to art shikai full-time. Just as motorsport and automobile culture in Japan began accelerating. And then came the opportunity. In 1928, Yuzo Sakakibara decided to expand. Art Shikai would open a new branch in Hamamatsu. It was a risk. Hamamatsu wasn't Tokyo. It didn't have the same wealth, the same volume of foreign automobiles. But Sakakibara believed in the region, and more importantly, he believed in one person. Soichiro Honda, at just 21 years old. Soichiro was offered control of the new branch, manager, leader, decision-maker. It was a staggering responsibility and a staggering leap of faith. Soichiro accepted immediately. To him, this wasn't promotion. It was validation. He left Tokyo not as a servant, but as a professional. The Hamamatsu shop opened quietly and struggled immediately. Customers didn't trust a young manager. They didn't trust his age. They didn't trust his experience. Some refused service outright. Others took their cars elsewhere. Soichiro's confidence met reality. The shop barely survived its first year. To stay afloat, Soichiro repaired what other shops discarded: old parts, broken machines, scraps. But he didn't complain. He worked longer hours. He applied everything he had learned. Slowly, results followed. Repairs improved. Reputation grew. Customers returned. By the early 1930s, the Hamamatsu branch expanded from a one-man operation to a staff of 30. Soichiro's confidence returned, stronger than before. And with it, his love for speed. In the back of his workshop, Soichiro built his own racing car, the Hamamatsu. It wasn't just a machine. It was a statement. When he drove it, he reached speeds of 120 kilometers per hour, a national record. One that would stand for 20 years. Soichiro Honda was no longer invisible. He was a rising star, a rare young engineer, a shop owner, a racer. In American terms, this was the beginning of the dream. Talent rising from obscurity, success earned through grit. But speed has a cost, and ambition rarely knows when to slow down. Racing in the 1930s was brutal. There were no safety barriers, no protective gear worth mentioning. Drivers raced inches from death. In June of 1936, that reality caught up to Soichiro Honda. During a race outside Tokyo, his car crashed violently. Metal twisted, glass shattered. Soichiro was thrown from the vehicle. He nearly died. His left arm fractured, his shoulder dislocated, his face severely injured. He spent months in the hospital. The rising star was suddenly still. For the first time, machines had pushed back harder than he expected. And when he recovered, he did something no one anticipated. 4 months later, Soichiro returned to racing. His family was horrified. His wife pleaded with him to stop. His father argued that speed would eventually kill him, but Soichiro refused. Racing wasn't just passion, it was identity, only after repeated arguments and growing pressure from those closest to him did he finally agree. He would never race again. The decision ended one chapter and forced another to begin. The speed that once carried him forward had almost destroyed him. Now that same obsession would have to be redirected, away from the track, toward something far more dangerous: industry. At 29 years old, Soichiro Honda believed he understood machines. He believed he understood failure, and he believed he was ready for more. What he didn't know yet was that the next phase of his life would strip him of everything he thought he had earned. Speed had brought him confidence, too much of it, and the world was about to remind him how fragile early success really was. By the early 1930s, it finally looked like Soichiro Honda had made it. The Hamamatsu branch was no longer struggling. What started as a one-man operation had grown into a real business. 30 workers filled the workshop. Engines came in daily. Repairs went out constantly. Customers trusted the shop. And more importantly, they trusted the young man running it. At just 21 years old, Soichiro Honda was no longer an apprentice. He was a manager, a leader, in the eyes of many. A success story. This was the part of the story that looks good on paper. A young mechanic rising through talent and grit, building something from nothing, earning respect early. In American terms, this was the dream, but success has a dangerous side. Especially when it arrives too soon. The faster the shop grew, the more Soichiro pushed himself. Longer hours, bigger risks. He didn't slow down, he accelerated, because success, to Soichiro Honda, was never meant to be stable. It was meant to be tested. And nothing tested machines or men like speed. Racing was still calling him, even as his responsibilities increased. Soichiro couldn't let go of the track. In fact, success made racing more tempting, because now he had something to prove, not just to others, to himself. In the back of the Hamamatsu workshop, Soichiro began building another racing car. This one wasn't borrowed. It wasn't assembled from scraps, it was his. Designed with everything he had learned. From years of observation, failure, and obsession, he named it simply the Hamamatsu. The car was fast. Dangerously fast. On open roads, Soichiro pushed it harder and harder, until one day, he reached 120 kilometers per hour, a national speed record. At the time, no one in Japan had gone faster. The record would stand for 20 years. For Soichiro Honda, this was confirmation. He wasn't just lucky, he wasn't just persistent. He believed he had mastered speed itself, and that belief was intoxicating. The shop thrived, the racing car succeeded. Soichiro Honda stood at the intersection of business success and personal ambition. But speed always collects its debt. In the mid-1930s, racing was unforgiving. There were no roll cages, no helmets worth mentioning, no safety barriers. Drivers raced inches from spectators. Mistakes weren't punished with penalties. They were punished with injuries or death. On a day in June of 1936, Soichiro Honda entered another race outside Tokyo. The conditions were rough. The roads uneven, the machines unstable. But none of that slowed him down, because confidence has a way of silencing caution. At high speed, something went wrong. No one knows exactly what failed first. A mechanical fault, a miscalculation, a moment of overconfidence. What followed was chaos. The car lost control. Metal twisted. The world turned upside down. Soichiro Honda was thrown violently from the vehicle. Spectators ran. Dust filled the air. For a moment, it looked like he was dead. He wasn't. But he was close. Soichiro suffered severe injuries. His left arm was fractured. His shoulder was dislocated. His face was badly damaged. He was rushed to the hospital. And there, for the first time in his life, he was forced to stop. Weeks passed, then months. Machines were replaced by silence. Speed was replaced by pain. The rising star lay still, staring at ceilings instead of engines. Doctors spoke carefully. Recovery would take time, and even if his body healed, they warned him. Another crash like this could kill him. But recovery wasn't just physical, it was psychological. Soichiro Honda had always believed that pushing harder led to progress, that failure could be outrun, that speed revealed truth. Now speed had nearly taken everything from him. When he finally returned home, the reaction was immediate. His wife was furious, not emotional, furious. She had watched him chase danger for years, and now she had watched him nearly die. His father, the man who had taught him to work with his hands, didn't argue. He simply said this couldn't continue. The family didn't see racing as passion. They saw it as recklessness. Arguments followed, not once, repeatedly. Soichiro insisted he was fine, that the crash was bad luck, that racing was part of who he was. But the people closest to him saw something different. They saw a man confusing obsession with purpose. 4 months after the crash, against medical advice, Soichiro returned to racing. It shocked everyone. The injuries weren't fully healed. The risk hadn't changed. But his identity was tied to speed. Walking away felt like surrender. And then came the final confrontation. His wife made it clear. This wasn't about ambition anymore. It was about survival. The man who had built a business, who employed 30 workers, who was responsible for families beyond his own, couldn't gamble his life on the track. For the first time, Soichiro Honda faced a failure he couldn't repair. He couldn't adjust a bolt. He couldn't redesign the problem. He had to choose, and reluctantly, he did. Soichiro Honda never raced again. The decision ended an era, the era of speed as escape, the era of speed as proof. What remained was something heavier, responsibility and uncertainty. He survived the crash, but the real destruction was still coming. Because walking away from racing didn't just remove danger, it removed the outlet that had defined him, the place where his obsession had meaning. Without the track, Soichiro Honda turned inward, toward industry, toward manufacturing, toward a challenge far more brutal than speed. Building something that lasted, and unlike racing, industry wouldn't forgive overconfidence. It wouldn't reward instinct. It would demand precision, discipline, and patience. The success that came too early had planted the seeds of the next collapse. And the world was about to remind Soichiro Honda that surviving a crash didn't mean surviving what came next. By the late 1930s, Soichiro Honda believed he had finally found his next mountain. Racing was over. Speed was gone. And with it, the identity that had carried him through his 20s. But Honda didn't see this as an ending. He saw it as a redirection. If he could no longer prove himself on the track, he would prove himself in industry. Because in his mind, if you could repair machines, you could build them. That assumption would nearly destroy him. Up until this point, Soichiro Honda's world had been mechanical, workshops, engines, hands-on problem solving. When something broke, you fixed it. If a part failed, you redesigned it. Industrial manufacturing, however, played by different rules. Rules Honda did not yet understand. In 1936, Soichiro proposed a bold idea. He wanted to move beyond repairs and racing. He wanted to manufacture piston rings, critical components used in internal combustion engines, small parts, tight tolerances, mass production. To Honda, Piston rings represented leverage. If he could produce them at scale, he wouldn't need to race. He wouldn't need to repair. He could supply Japan's growing automotive industry. Soichiro proposed transforming the Hamamatsu branch into a manufacturing company. The response was immediate and negative. The shareholders of Art Shikai rejected the idea. From their perspective, the repair business was already profitable. Why risk capital on manufacturing? Especially with a man known more for obsession than discipline. They didn't want experiments, they wanted stability. Soichiro Honda walked away. He didn't argue. He didn't compromise. He left. In 1937, he founded a new company, Tokai Seiki Heavy Industry. This time, he wouldn't be an employee. He would be the one taking the risk. Soichiro appointed a close friend, Shichiro Kato, as president. Honda himself focused on engineering, designing piston rings that could meet industrial standards. At least, that was the plan. Reality hit hard. From the beginning, things went wrong. The piston rings Honda designed looked fine on paper. They worked in small batches, but when scaled, they failed. Metal warped, tolerances drifted, quality collapsed. Honda worked obsessively, days in the repair shop, nights in the research lab. For months, nothing improved. Failures piled up. His health deteriorated. He lost weight. His face became gaunt. The man who once thrived on speed now moved slowly, worn down by repetition. And then came Toyota, Japan's rising automotive giant. Toyota agreed to evaluate Honda's piston rings. This was the opportunity Honda had been waiting for. He submitted 50 samples. Only 3 passed inspection. 47 were rejected. It was devastating. This wasn't a near miss. It was a rejection of his entire approach. Honda had believed talent could carry him, that intuition and experience were enough. Toyota's engineers disagreed. Their standards were ruthless. Repeatability mattered more than brilliance. Systems mattered more than individuals. Honda didn't give up. But for the first time, he admitted something painful. He didn't know enough. The man who had hated school his entire life did the unthinkable. He went back. Soichiro Honda enrolled as a part-time student at the Hamamatsu Industrial Institute. He studied metallurgy. Not casually, obsessively. He didn't just learn formulas. He visited steel plants across Japan. He spoke with engineers. He observed manufacturing lines. He studied why metals behave differently under heat, why defects multiplied at scale, why what worked once failed 1,000 times. This was not glamorous work. There were no races, no applause, just repetition, precision, discipline, slow learning. For years, Honda rebuilt himself. Not as a mechanic, not as a racer, but as an industrial thinker. He learned that manufacturing was not about fixing mistakes. It was about preventing them. That quality was not something you inspected at the end. It was something you designed into the system. When Honda tried again, everything changed. The piston rings improved, consistency stabilized, defect rates dropped. Toyota tested them again. This time they passed. Orders followed, not just from Toyota, but from across the country. Demand exploded. Tokai Seiki expanded rapidly. Factories grew. The workforce grew, from dozens to hundreds. To nearly 2,000 employees, Soichiro Honda had finally done it. He had crossed the invisible line between workshop skill and industrial scale. But this success came at a cost. The world was changing. In 1941, Japan entered the Pacific War. and industry stopped being private, Tokai Seki was placed under government control. The Ministry of Munitions took over operations. Toyota acquired 45% of the company. Soichiro Honda was demoted from founder to senior managing director. The man who had risked everything no longer controlled his own creation. Then came the bombings, air raid sirens, factories targeted. In 1944, Tokai Seki's main plant in Hamamatsu was destroyed by a direct hit. In 1945, the Nankai earthquake collapsed another facility. Years of work vanished. Japan surrendered. And with it, Honda's industrial dream lay in ruins. In the aftermath, Honda sold what remained of Tokai Seki to Toyota. For 450,000 yen, it wasn't victory, it was survival. Publicly, Honda said he needed rest. Privately, he was exhausted. He had learned the hardest lesson of his life. Talent didn't scale. Obsession didn't scale. Speed didn't scale. Only systems did. And systems demanded humility, precision, patience. Soichiro Honda had finally mastered industry. But only after losing everything. Again, and this time there would be no racing. No repair shop, no safety net, just a destroyed country. A broken economy and one man forced to start over, with nothing left to lose. By the early 1940s, Japan was no longer moving toward the future. It was moving toward war. Factories that once built engines for progress were now repurposed for survival. Industry stopped being private. It became strategic. And when Japan entered the Pacific War in 1941, Soichiro Honda lost control of everything he had built. Almost overnight, Tokai Seki was no longer his company. Government officials arrived. Orders were issued. The factory was placed under the authority of the Ministry of Munitions. Production priorities changed. Quality no longer mattered. Efficiency no longer mattered. Only volume, only speed, only war. Toyota acquired 45% of Tokai Seki's equity. On paper, it looked like partnership. In reality, it was a takeover. Soichiro Honda was stripped of authority, demoted from founder to senior managing director. The man who had spent years learning how to build systems now watched those systems get dismantled. Decisions were no longer his. Materials were rationed. Standards were lowered. Workers were drafted. One by one, skilled laborers disappeared from the factory floor. Young men left wearing uniforms instead of work clothes. Some never returned. The factory kept running. But it no longer belonged to him, and worse, it no longer stood for what he believed in. Honda tried to adapt. He redesigned processes to use inferior materials. He experimented with substitutes. He worked around shortages. But war does not reward precision. It rewards obedience. By 1944, air raid sirens became a daily sound. Hamamatsu was no longer safe. Factories were targets. One night, the inevitable happened. Bombers appeared overhead. Explosions shook the ground. Fire tore through steel and concrete. Tokai Seki's main plant was hit directly. Machines were destroyed. Production lines collapsed. Years of work vanished in minutes. Honda arrived after the bombing. He walked through smoke and debris, twisted metal, burned equipment. Nothing was salvageable. Still, he didn't quit. He tried to rebuild. Temporary structures were erected. Partial operations resumed. Then, in January 1945, the earth itself turned against him. The Nankai earthquake struck. Buildings that had survived the bombing collapsed without warning. The remaining plant at Iwata fell. This time, there was nothing left to rebuild. No factory, no machines, no workforce. Japan surrendered in August 1945. The war was over, but for Soichiro Honda, everything was gone. He had no company, no assets, no production. Just debt, exhaustion, and rubble. The man who had once believed systems could scale now stood in a country that had been reduced to fragments. With no alternative, Honda sold what remained of Tokai Seki to Toyota. 450,000 yen, not profit, not victory. Survival. Publicly, he announced he was taking time off. Privately, he didn't know what came next. Japan was starving. Cities were destroyed. Fuel was rationed. People walked because there was no gasoline. Factories were silent. For the first time in his life, Soichiro Honda had nothing to fix. Nothing to build, nothing to race. No factory, no company, no future. This was the lowest point, and it would have broken most people. But it didn't break him, because somewhere inside the wreckage, a question began to form. If Japan had nothing left, what did it need most? And that question would lead him to one final reinvention. Japan in 1945 was not a country rebuilding. It was a country barely surviving. Cities were flattened. Factories were gone. Fuel was almost non-existent. People didn't drive, they walked. Or they rode bicycles slowly, painfully through streets filled with rubble. For most people, the war had taken everything. For Soichiro Honda, it had taken everything again. No factory, no company, no capital, no clear future. But what Japan lacked in resources, it overflowed with problems. And Honda had always been drawn to problems. Gasoline was rationed. Almost impossible to find. Farmers couldn't transport goods. Workers couldn't reach jobs. The country wasn't just broken, it was immobile. Soichiro Honda noticed something others ignored: scrap. Military surplus engines, small generator motors once used to power radios, were scattered everywhere. Discarded. Useless to the army now, but to Honda, they were familiar. Internal combustion engines, simple, rugged, repairable. One question changed everything. What if a bicycle didn't need gasoline? What if it didn't need to be pedaled the whole way? What if Japan's most common form of transportation could be given just enough power to move people forward again? Honda didn't think in terms of revolutions. He thought in terms of hacks. In a small, damaged warehouse, he began experimenting. He mounted surplus engines onto bicycles, crude at first, heavy, loud, unstable, but they worked. The result wasn't elegant, but it moved. And movement in post-war Japan was priceless. People noticed. Neighbors asked questions. Orders followed. Not because the machines were beautiful, but because they solved a real problem. Honda wasn't trying to build a motorcycle company. He was trying to help people get to work. In 1946, with almost no money and a handful of helpers, Soichiro Honda founded the Honda Technical Research Institute. Not a corporation, not a factory, a workshop. 12 people, basic tools, scrap metal everywhere. What they lacked in equipment, they made up for in urgency. They worked nonstop. Engines were cleaned, repaired, modified. Bicycles were reinforced. Failures were constant. Chains snapped. Engines overheated. Frames cracked. Honda encouraged experimentation. Break it. Fix it. Learn why it broke. Orders kept coming. Demand grew faster than supply. Soon, the biggest problem wasn't customers. It was engines. Surplus stock ran out. Honda faced a choice: shut down, or do what he had never done before. Design an engine from scratch. This wasn't repair. This wasn't adaptation. This was creation. In 1947, Honda began developing his own engine. Small, light, reliable. Built specifically for Japan's conditions. Poor fuel quality, rough roads, constant use. The result was the Type A engine. For the first time, the name Honda appeared on a machine. It wasn't flashy, but it worked. The bicycle sold instantly. So fast that production couldn't keep up. Honda realized something critical. This wasn't a temporary fix. This was a business, but growth required capital. Honda didn't have investors. He didn't have banks. So he did something radical. He wrote a letter. Actually, thousands of them. Honda sent an open letter to every bicycle shop owner in Japan. 18,000 letters. In it, he didn't promise wealth. He promised utility. He explained that Japan needed mobility, that bicycles with engines could help rebuild the country, that if shop owners believed in the idea, they could invest. 3,000 shops responded. 3,000 people trusted a man who had just lost everything. With that support, Honda scaled production. In 1948, the Honda Motor Company was officially founded. No longer a research institute. No longer an experiment, a manufacturer. The early products were simple. But they sold. Honda wasn't competing with luxury brands. He wasn't competing with speed. He was competing with necessity. And necessity always wins. This was the true rebirth, not driven by ego. Not driven by ambition, driven by crisis. Crisis didn't slow Soichiro Honda down, it forced him to invent. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't chasing speed. He was building momentum. By the late 1950s, Honda was no longer just rebuilding Japan. It was ready to test itself against the world. And there was only one market that mattered: America. At the time, the United States didn't just buy vehicles, it defined them: big engines, heavy machines, raw power. Motorcycles in America were not transportation. They were identity. They were rebellion. They were loud, expensive, and intimidating. Brands like Harley-Davidson and Triumph didn't just sell bikes, they sold image. And by every traditional measure, Honda didn't belong there. Too small, too quiet, too cheap. Soichiro Honda understood this. But he also understood something Americans often forget. Markets don't belong to companies, they belong to people. Honda's breakthrough wasn't technological, it was psychological. In 1958, Honda introduced a motorcycle that broke every rule. The Super Cub. It wasn't aggressive, it wasn't intimidating. It didn't demand strength or experience, it was light, reliable, easy to ride, and most importantly, affordable. In the United States, it sold for just $295. Less than a quarter of what many American motorcycles cost. Honda didn't target bikers, it targeted workers, students, delivery drivers, people who needed transportation, not status. And this is where Honda truly beat America at its own game. Not by out-muscling its competitors, but by outthinking them. While American brands focused on image, Honda focused on usability. While others marketed rebellion, Honda marketed freedom. The now famous campaign didn't show leather jackets or open highways. It showed normal people, office workers, college students, women. People smiling. You meet the nicest people on a Honda. It wasn't just advertising, it was a redefinition. Motorcycles stopped being symbols of danger. They became tools of everyday life. Sales exploded, not just in America, worldwide. But Soichiro Honda never believed market success was enough. He believed performance had to be proven. And for him, there was only one proving ground: motorsport. International racing wasn't just competition, it was validation. Honda entered the world's most brutal races, against the most experienced manufacturers. At the Isle of Man TT, the most dangerous motorcycle race on Earth, Honda arrived as an outsider. European teams laughed. Japanese motorcycles weren't taken seriously. At first, Honda lost. Badly. But losing never embarrassed Soichiro Honda, it educated him. Every defeat was analyzed, every failure dissected. Honda engineers went home with data, not excuses. Within years, Honda returned stronger, faster, more precise. In 1959, Honda won the Manufacturer's Team Prize at the Isle of Man TT. Then they won again, and again. Suddenly, Japanese motorcycles weren't cheap alternatives. They were benchmarks. By the early 1960s, Honda had become the largest motorcycle manufacturer in the world. 10 million motorcycles produced by 1968. But Soichiro Honda still wasn't satisfied. Because motorcycles were never the original dream. Cars were. Against advice from investors. Against resistance from Japanese officials. Against logic. Honda entered the automobile market. The first attempts were modest. Small trucks, small sports cars. Then came something no one expected. The Civic. Released in the early 1970s, just as the world was hit by an oil crisis, fuel prices skyrocketed. Big engines became liabilities. Suddenly, efficiency mattered. Honda's engineering philosophy, lightweight, precise, efficient, was no longer niche. It was essential. The Civic didn't just survive the crisis. It thrived. And then came the Accord. Reliable. Comfortable. Fuel efficient. It became one of the best-selling cars in automotive history. By the 1980s, Honda was no longer catching up. It was leading. Third largest car manufacturer in Japan. Then the world, jets, marine engines, power equipment. Robotics. Honda expanded not by chasing trends, but by applying the same principle everywhere. Learn from failure. Design for reality. Scale systems, not ego. Soichiro Honda retired in 1973. He didn't leave behind a perfect company. He left behind a culture, a belief that mistakes weren't evidence of incompetence. They were evidence of progress. Near the end of his life, Honda reflected on his journey. He didn't talk about victories. He talked about errors. He said his life had been a long series of mistakes, blunders, and misjudgments, but he was proud. Because no mistake was ever repeated for the same reason. That was the philosophy, not brilliance, not luck, not speed. Iteration. Honda didn't avoid failure, he mastered it. And in doing so, he didn't just build a company, he built a way of thinking that changed how the world moves.